What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. This is a video that I've wanted to make for a really long time, and we finally got to do it. So today we are going to be comparing TotalBoat to SuperClear epoxy. These are two of the most popular epoxy brands on the market, so we're going to put them to the test today. Recently, I had a customer reach out to me on Instagram. He sent me a message. He wanted me to make him a custom epoxy serving board and a custom epoxy bowl. He wanted them to match. He wanted them to go in his kitchen. So I thought that'd be the perfect opportunity to test out the two different brands of epoxy. We're going to use the SuperClear epoxy for the bowl and the TotalBoat epoxy for the serving board. All right, so we're going to start out by making the epoxy board. So the customer wants it to be 18 inches long and 13 inches wide. So since this is live edge lumber, we don't really have a straight edge. We're just going to go roughly 13 inches across and leave the live edges so it's got a really cool look. So the first thing that we got to do is, like usual, build a mold. All right, so I found this really nice piece of 1/4 inch plywood. Probably just got this from Home Depot. We're going to be using this for our TotalBoat pour. And we just put a little hot glue on the back to glue these down. That's just going to hold them in place. So TotalBoat Thick Set has been the epoxy that I use for a long time. It's what we're going to be using on this board over here. And like I said at the beginning of the video, we're going to be using the SuperClear liquid glass for the big bowl that we're going to be making. But I just want to quickly mention that the TotalBoat Thick Set is a 3-to-1 epoxy. So 3 parts of the resin and 1 part of the hardener. And it is pretty darn clear. It's very, very clear when it dries, and it's almost like water when you pour it. Very, very similar to the SuperClear, as you'll see, but I just wanted to go over that. The SuperClear is actually a 2-to-1, unlike the TotalBoat, which again is a 3-to-1. We're going to go ahead and mix up 48 ounces of the TotalBoat Thick Set epoxy. So that was the resin. And here is the hardener. We're going to add a little bit of this Caribbean blue epoxy tint because the customer requested it. The TotalBoat says to mix it up for 5 minutes, so that's what we're going to do. All right, so I mixed up our epoxy for about 5 minutes, so the TotalBoat is ready to pour. You can see it's almost as thin as water, and that's a really good thing for a thick set epoxy like this. It's going to get into all the cracks and crevices of the wood. As you can see, there is not very many bubbles, but I do like to go through with my torch and just quickly hit it, and that'll pop any of the little surface bubbles that there is. So I added a little bit more epoxy in there, and you can see you can kind of swirl it around and get some really, really cool designs. Now, I find with the TotalBoat Thick Set that it dries very flat. So if you don't swirl it right at the right time, it'll just dry as a flat color without any swirl. And you'll see once we do the SuperClear that it dries a little bit differently. But you can swirl the TotalBoat. You just have to do it at the right time to where it's thick enough that it'll hold the swirl. One of the big differences between TotalBoat and SuperClear's deeper pour epoxies, TotalBoat stuff I can find that you start working with it around 48 hours after you pour it. But with the SuperClear, you can only start working with it about 72 hours after you pour it. So the SuperClear takes quite a bit longer to dry. That can be a good thing if you're pouring a lot of epoxy, but if you're just doing a small board like this, you know, you'd prefer that it dries a little bit faster. All right, so this is what we're going to be making the bowl out of. This is a big, nasty piece of walnut. This has been sitting in a guy's basement for about 15 years, so really dry, but the whole bottom of it is rotted out. So we're going to test out the SuperClear epoxy on this. We're going to basically fill up this entire bottom with SuperClear epoxy, and then we're going to turn this into a really nice bowl. So I'm just going to start out by putting some of this frog tape down. I love using this stuff to build molds. It's super easy to work with. So now you can go back and put a little bead of hot glue on all the seams. And that'll seal them up really good. Alright, you can see the mold is all done. Looks really sloppy. We got a ton of hot glue on there. But this is going to hold epoxy really well, I hope. You can see I've got it just up to about the top of the wood there, and that's about as deep as I want my bowl. So we're going to go ahead and mix up some SuperClear epoxy and test it out. Alright, mixing up some SuperClear liquid glass. So pouring the epoxy, you don't really notice any difference, aside from the fact that, like I said, the SuperClear is a 2-to-1 and the TotalBoat is a 3-to-1 mixture. Yep, so stirring up the SuperClear, it feels just the same as the TotalBoat. It's very, very thin, which is what you want for a deep pour epoxy. You want it to be thin, you want it to release air bubbles very easily, and that's what you get with both the SuperClear and the TotalBoat. Now, one of the main differences between the SuperClear liquid glass and the TotalBoat thickset is that the TotalBoat thickset is only advertised to pour up to 1 3/4 of an inch thick, and the SuperClear is advertised to go from 2 to 4 inches thick. So slightly different. Pray that the mold doesn't leak. Alright, so it's been about 14 hours since I poured the SuperClear liquid glass. You can see it is still pretty much a liquid. It's hardened up a little bit. I can tell it's a little bit thicker, but it is still a liquid, and that just shows you how long this stuff takes to dry. It really lets all that air escape out of there for these really deep pours. Alright, so our board is done. I've had it drying for 4 or 5 days now. It's been sitting in my shop, kind of collecting dust. So you can see it's kind of scratched up and things. But we're going to go ahead and run the board through the planer, get it flattened, and then we're going to go ahead and finish up the TotalBoat epoxy pour. After running this thing through the planer a couple times, it is nice and flat. You can see that TotalBoat and that Black Diamond Pigments gave us a really nice flat blue color because we did not swirl it. Alright, so I got the board sanded up to 120 grit. I'm going to get it all the way up to 320, but I wanted to mention a couple of quick things. So both the epoxies sand very similar. They both sand almost identical. One thing with epoxy is you want to keep that sander moving, because if you hold it in one place, it'll get real warm, and then the epoxy will start to get soft. You don't want that. So keep moving the sander around, and also you don't want to put down too much pressure. You really, really want to keep it light, because otherwise you will get a whole bunch of figure-8 squiggle marks if you press down too hard, and that goes for both brands of epoxy. Like I said, I'm going to sand this one all the way up to 320 grit, and then we will go ahead and get started on the Epoxy Bowl before we finish this. Alright, so now that our board is done, our epoxy is dry on our bowl. So I'm going to remove a lot of this extra wood on top because I have to glue a little waste block on here so I can mount it to the lathe. So I've turned TotalBoat thick set epoxy before. I'm very interested to see if the SuperClear liquid glass turns the same. I imagine it will, but there could be some differences. So I'm going to point those out as I get turning this thing. So that's going to be really interesting. All right, so I just finished turning the bowl. This thing came out pretty darn cool. A lot of neat grain in this walnut. The SuperClear epoxy turns just like the TotalBoat epoxy. So for all of you out there that do a lot of turning and things with epoxy and resin and acrylic, the SuperClear turns almost identical to the TotalBoat. I couldn't tell any differences. So you can tell we're going to have this nice big epoxy side over here. Now there's a big crack over here. I'm going to fill that with some 5-minute epoxy. But this is going to be really cool. And I'm glad that both of these epoxies turn the same and that you can use them both for projects on the lathe. I'm going to go ahead and sand this bowl up to 400 grit. And then we're going to apply finish to this and put some mineral oil on the serving board. Alright, so we're going to be using some General Finishes Armor Seal. This is the satin. I love using this stuff on bowls. It makes it really smooth, and it's just got some really cool properties to it that I like. So the first coat, I like to apply that pretty thick. It's mostly just going to soak in. So it's going to take quite a bit. But man, this walnut is really cool. All right, so you can see that I got the first coat on here. This little waste block is going to get cut off after the bowl is done getting finished. But you can see it's kind of blotchy in the bottom, and that's because a lot of the finish soaked in. So as we apply more coats, that will go away. But what I really want to focus in on is the epoxy pour. The epoxy pour is flawless on this piece. It did not chip out, it didn't tear out, and it did a really good job on the lathe, just like the TotalBoat stuff. All right, so now that our bowl has a coat of finish on it, I'm going to go ahead and put a coat of finish on our board. So we're going to be using mineral oil and beeswax. So I like to apply a base coat of mineral oil, let it soak in, apply a couple more coats of mineral oil, and then we will apply a layer of beeswax. I love the color of that epoxy. Alright, so I got the finish on our bowl. It is completely done. Man, this thing came out so good. You can see through that epoxy. It's kind of clear, transparent, and the blue just came out absolutely gorgeous on that bowl. The finish looks really good on it too. This was our TotalBoat pour. It came out really good as well. I like the flatness of it. You know, obviously, like I said, the SuperClear dries with a bit of a swirl. The TotalBoat doesn't do that. The TotalBoat dries flat, which, you know, can be good or bad depending on the look you're going for. But this walnut just looks amazing. The grain in this wood is just incredible. And I know the customer is going to love both of these pieces. All right, so you guys saw the projects that we made with both of these epoxies. We obviously made that serving board and the bowl. But I just wanted to go over the details of both of these brands real quick. So the SuperClear liquid glass costs about 75 cents an ounce. The TotalBoat thick set costs about $1 an ounce. So the TotalBoat is about 25% more expensive than the liquid glass. So if you want to save 25%, go ahead and get the liquid glass. However, I have a coupon code with TotalBoat for 20% off. So you can use the coupon code SCustom15. I'll put it on the screen there, SCustom15, and you can get 20% off your entire purchase at TotalBoat.com. However, SuperClear is frequently running sales on their epoxy, so obviously pricing is always going to vary, but they're pretty comparable if you use my coupon code. The SuperClear liquid glass takes about 96 hours to fully cure, and the TotalBoat thick set takes about 48 hours to fully cure, so about half as much time for the thick set. Lastly, the SuperClear liquid glass can be poured from 2 to 4 inches thick. The TotalBoat thick set can be poured from 1/8 of an inch up to 1 3/4 thick. So that's really where the big difference lies between these two brands. And the companies are all based in the U.S. TotalBoat is based in Rhode Island, and SuperClear liquid glass is made by FGCI, which is based in Florida. So both of these companies are in the United States. It's very easy to get a hold of their customer service. All their customer service representatives speak English, which is hard to come by these days. Guys, thank you so much for watching this week's video. I had a lot of fun testing out these epoxies. Obviously, I've used TotalBoat epoxy for the past few years now, but I really wanted to kind of open my eyes and test out some different brands, especially since I get a lot of people emailing me asking me what epoxy brands they should buy. I wanted to have a good idea of what the other brands provided, so I had a really, really good time testing out the brands and seeing what they could do. They're both great epoxies. I think they both do exactly what they advertise. Obviously, the TotalBoat says you can only pour up to 1 3/4 inches. So if you're going to be pouring anything under 1 3/4 inches thick, I would go ahead and use the TotalBoat thick set just because it dries faster. But if you're going to be doing anything 2 to 4 inches thick, obviously use the SuperClear because that's what it's advertised to do. I hope you guys had a really good holiday season. Happy New Year, and I'll see you next week.